Welcome everybody, and I've got Mark Keohane with me again. Welcome Mark, and this was filmed yesterday, so happy Valentine's Day to you.
Thank you very much.
Did you? I'm amazed that you're here not celebrating it with the love of your life, but thanks for taking the time.
Pleasure.
A great season ahead of us, or Rugby World Cup, Super Rugby, a lot for the punters out there. Bit of a minefield with the amount of All Blacks that are going to get rested, the policies around All Black selection into those Super Rugby teams. We've got the Stormers in a bit of turmoil, I guess, for lack of a better word. Sharks, a lot of expectation on the Sharks. With the Bulls signing so many players, there's a lot of expectation on the Bulls, and obviously the most successful Super Rugby franchise being the Bulls. Maybe this could be the year. I doubt it though. And the Lions, a lot of talent left the Lions, and we're going to see how their academy holds up or how it's developed. So a very interesting year. So let's start and try and look at the All Black selections or missions for the Super Rugby, because we were chatting yesterday and we talked about how in World Cup years, the New Zealand teams don't perform so well in Super Rugby. Yeah,
they've got a very a distinct policy that it's All Blacks first, it's World Cup first, the Rugby Championship second, and Super Rugby very much third. Interestingly, the Crusaders, who have supplied the bulk of the All Blacks over those years, tend to do their worst in World Cup years. And when the Highlanders won it, the least All Blacks in it, it was also in a World Cup year. So they very much focused around peaking in September, not peaking in May or June. If you look at the 2015 World Cup, Richie McCaw probably had on the surface, one of his more indifferent seasons, and Dan Carter, there was all the talk, he's finished, don't even pick him, he's not going to make the All Blacks. But the All Blacks had a strategic plan for them, and they were phenomenal in that quarter-final, semi-final and final of the World Cup where they had to peak. So I know that Rassie Erasmus is doing a similar thing. I don't think he's quite announced it as formally as the All Blacks have, in terms of his squad identification, how many players have to get rested, when do they get rested, what kind of graphs have they got for all the teams. I think for him it's more around, say, the top 25 players that he's got. I know with New Zealand they've pretty much identified their top 30. I know that they can't play more than 5 successive games.
From what I understand as well, they're supposed to be rested for 2 games, for sure. That's an agreement that they've reached, that there's 2 games they don't even dress for.
Yeah, and in those 2 games they don't even train. They actually take a complete break from the game. They don't see them down at training in that week. They actually give them those 2 weeks off to kind of just refresh the mind a bit. None of the All Blacks who toured at the end of last year's Northern Hemisphere season were allowed to play in any pre-season games. And a lot of them aren't playing this first weekend, so they've integrated those guys back into the mix. Someone like Sonny Boy Williams, who left the tour with injury, he's only on the bench. Tomorrow Ma'anan is starting, or this weekend Ma'anan is starting at 13, which is interesting. So it looks like they are going to play the Sonny Boy Williams 12 and Nanu 13. A lot of people thought they would play each other off for that number 12 jersey. And the key is to see if Nanu's still got the pace in his legs at Super Rugby level. But I think if you look at the South African setup, big season for a guy like Duane Vermeulen, a lot on the line for a guy like Schalk Brits. You know, he's been doing that mentoring role with the Springboks. Rassie Erasmus definitely wants to take him to the World Cup as Schalk Brits as one of his 3 hookers, because he wants that experience, a guy who could step into a World Cup final if Malcolm Marx was injured or Bongi was unavailable. Well,
the Mexican soccer team took far more hookers to the World Cup than 3.
So I think a big one for Duane Vermeulen, there's a lot of expectation on him. You know, we saw the kind of performance he put in against England. We certainly missed him in the Rugby Championship, and the Springboks and South African rugby needs him to be performing. I think that's probably one of the best signings the Bulls could have made, is to have a number 8, a leader on the field like that, and I think he'll combine well with Pollard. We'll also see just how much influence John Mitchell had last year. I know they only won 6 from 16, but he did put a lot of good things in place. They lost games that a lot of people felt they shouldn't have lost. They showed an attacking flair. But the one thing with South African teams that we've learned over and over, the minute there's expectation, they tend to crumble and fold. It's when you write them off, they tend to want to show you that they can do the backs to the wall stuff.
Maybe Ireland have taken a page out of that book as well.
Oh, without a doubt. You know, they say it's one thing to hunt, it's the other thing to be the hunted. Yeah. And that old cliche, it's a lot easier to look for the crown than to actually wear it. And that's, I think, where New Zealand rugby over the last 10 years, there's just no debate. The consistency that they've shown in Super Rugby, in Test Rugby, to week after week, year after year, sustain that excellence. And, you know, their poor year is losing 2 Test matches out of 14. Every other team, that's the most successful year they've ever had.
So have you read what the English press is saying now about?
Yeah, I mean, because they can give it to Eddie now.
Yeah. Are you buying or selling that England are as good as the English press make them out to be?
No, I think England are a good side. Yeah. I don't think anything dramatically has changed. John Mitchell has added to their defensive pattern. They played a woeful French team away from home, who's been beaten by everyone. And they took Ireland by surprise. I think Ireland was still very much in party mode after beating the All Blacks last November. Their whole year was geared towards that All Black game. And the key for Ireland is to live with this expectation now. But I think England they had a few injuries last year. They know they're not significantly better than they've ever been under Eddie Jones. And their test will be against Wales. I see Eddie's called this Welsh team the greatest ever. I don't know if the lads of this, I don't know if they will actually even blink an eyelid.
I read in the New Zealand Herald yesterday about this Welsh team not having accomplished anything with this 11 win streak. Now, to say it's not accomplished anything is just typical New Zealand journalism. It's certainly not a bad. They've beaten the Springboks twice, Australia. They've beaten the 11 teams in front of them, and the article was saying that with them only beating England next week, will it have meant anything? Now, as a Welshman, I've gone through many campaigns where we were the whipping boys. So for 11 test wins for Wales, fantastic. But again, people I think don't understand the rivalry that there is between Wales and England. More so from the animosity of being Welsh and living next door to our southern neighbours. It's going to be one hell of a battle. Not the sort of game I'd want to be playing in the build-up to a World Cup.
No, and also I think in the Southern Hemisphere, there's the average fan that I chat to has a total disregard for the Six Nations and the history from a cultural perspective around the Six Nations and what it means. And I think it's going to be potentially be one of the games of the season. Yeah. That's inclusive of rugby championship games.
It's our World Cup, that game. It's our World Cup final. Sure, there's expectation, but it's an optimistic expectation on Wales getting and advancing through to the World Cup. There's a lot of talk about parity and these six, 7 teams that could win the World Cup. There's not. France will never win the World Cup this year. Scotland will never win the World Cup. Wales are a rank outsider. So for me, there's 3 teams, and Australia are absolutely hopeless. Although saying that, they may perform well in the Super Rugby this year, because there won't be the resting of players to the extent that the All Blacks do, and maybe even some of the Springboks. So for me, you've got 3 teams that could win the World Cup. New Zealand are a cut above. Then you have England and Ireland. Those are the only 3 legitimate contenders for me in the World Cup.
And South Africa have got the great draw because they got New Zealand in the pool.
Sorry, and South Africa, sorry. So there's 4 teams.
So win or lose, they go separate paths, and they would only meet again in the final. Yeah. The key there is you've got to win 3 big games to win the World Cup. Richie McCaw was quoted the other day saying he feels that's where the All Blacks have an advantage from their last 2 campaigns, is they've dealt with that expectation of having to win it at home and then going with a magnificent squad to 2015 and defending the title the way they did. His question mark to the islands of the world, to the Englands, to the South Africa, to the Welsh, is can you do that 3 in a row? They're good enough, he says, to knock over any team in a quarter or a semi-final, but can they not be the ones getting knocked over? And that's the challenge, and he still thinks New Zealand has that mental edge.
They also have the depth, don't they?
They do, and I chatted to Rassie Erasmus the other day. I asked him, is this England side anything significantly better than last year? And he felt no. And he said the key with all, and he put South Africa included in that, the key with all of them is who's your number 2 and 3 in each position.
Yes.
Because that's what you need to know when you go to a World Cup, because there's no guarantee number one's going to be there.
Because the average fan, sorry Mark, the average fan out there looks at the 15 players, the 15 starting players, and then tends to just focus on that. Whereas someone like Rassi, who's got a fantastic rugby brain, will look at and say, we need 3 players in each position, because common sense tells you if you're going to play, how many games do these players playing before the World Cup? The Super Rugby campaign, then they've got the
shortened Rugby Championship,
and a couple warm-up games. So they can, there's no doubt, I can guarantee you after Wales v England next week, there's going to be at least 2 England players that are out for the season, and a couple of Welsh players that are out for the season that aren't going to be available for the World Cup. So anybody that's just focusing on 15 Welsh players or 15 English players now, those England and Wales have reasonable depth. It's the teams like Ireland, I think, that don't have much depth that are going to be found out at the World Cup.
And this is what has happened to Ireland at every World Cup. The last one, they were also trumpeted to do very well. They lost 2 or 3 key players. They took a hammering from Argentina in the quarterfinal. So if you look at an example of the Welsh thing, Johnny Sexton, who in the last 2 years has been the form for life in world rugby, the senior statesman, the second choice there is Joe Carberry. Now, there is just no comparison between the qualities of the 2 players. You take Johnny Sexton and Conor Murray out of that Ireland side, it's a very different Irish side. They could either go from 2 in the world to being 5 in the world, where New Zealand, you pretty much are replacing like for like in most positions. Yeah. South Africa, I think that's what Erasmus was trying to do last year, was build number 2 and number 3, see what he's got. And there is still there's a big gap between who's 1 in South Africa in certain position and who's 2 and 3. And we saw that in the England series, when he played the first 2 test matches, pretty much played the side that he felt was the best, and then he mixed a match that I know the conditions were awful at Newlands, but a lot of those players didn't step up to the plate in that 3rd test, took a bit of a beating. Yeah,
I think the team, when you look at depth, and this is, I think the last Rugby World Cup 15, the team that was hit by injuries the most was Wales. I mean, I was amazed. I mean, I think they had 10, 11 players that were injured. And for them and they narrowly lost to the Box in the quarterfinals. Yeah. I mean, it was
78th minute try.
Yeah. Anyway, don't remind me of that. Let's get back, for the millennial audience out there, let's get back onto Super Rugby and look at this weekend. What are your thoughts on South African Super Rugby this year, and who's going to do well, who's not going to do well, and why?
I think the Bulls could be better than they were last year.
What do you think of their coach?
I think he's limited. He's been there before, hasn't really done it. I think John Mitchell's put in a lot of good things. It could be a case of, as Mitchell did with the Lions, and Johan Ackerman came in and actually bolted on that. Again, depth to me is their big issue. They lose a few players. They don't travel well.
On paper, they look good, eh?
Yeah, but on paper, most of our teams look good, and they tend to unravel and fall apart. The Stormers have the best squad, without a doubt. I think they've got the poorest coaching team. So,
ooh, really?
Yeah. No, very poor coaching team.
Well, what have they done? I mean, they've probably spent the most money in Super Rugby over the years, and have got nothing to show for it. They usually squeak into the playoffs and get and bitterly disappoint their fans. I think the sooner they move out to that beautiful stadium over there, the more support they'll get. I mean, when you can look at what happened with the superhero exhibition weekend, where that stadium was packed, and chatting to some of the Stormers guys, they just. They're almost incredulous in terms of the experience that they felt playing for a big crowd. And I think that, Super Sport, as good as they are at times, have done a great job of killing off rugby in this country to the point where we have 3/4 empty stadiums. Players, you can't underestimate the amount of adrenaline that players get surged with when they're playing in front of a full crowd.
I think it's also that we keep on speaking about Super Rugby and Test Rugby, that less should be more. Yeah. And also, if a team is winning. If a team's winning, people come and support it. And we saw that with the Lions. The minute they started winning, the crowd started coming back.
Yeah, went from 1,000 to 10,000.
To 10,000, yeah. Definitely, yeah. They should have been playing at the University of Johannesburg.
Yeah.
It would have been
packed in.
Packed stadium. The Stormers, I think, the biggest eye-opener for the leadership of the Stormers should have been that up until last year, historically the Stormers averaged 31,000 people at a home game, more than any team in the competition. That's for a side that's never won it, and they've only played in one final.
Should Dobson be coached there?
Dobber should be the coach for next year, but last year there was 18,000 was the average. Yeah, they certainly, I mean, Robbie Fleck's appointment at the time, after Eddie Jones, it was a makeshift role. I felt Dobber should have got it then. They gave it to Fleck. He had just coached the under-19s, and they've never come through, you know. And what I hate about South African coaches, they talk in 4-year cycles. And to judge me my 4th year, you know, Scott Robertson, when he took the New Zealand under-20 job, they won it. He took the Canterbury NPC job, they won in the first year. When he applied for the Crusaders job, they said, "What's your 4-year plan?" He said, "My 1-year plan is to win it." Yeah. And he won it in his first year, and he successfully defended in his second year.
Is he going to be the next coach of New Zealand?
Yes, I think he's got a good chance to potentially succeed, Hansen. Eh?
Yeah.
And if Joe Smith is unavailable, I think he'll be the one. Gatland has hinted at coming back, but I think he has such an attraction in Europe that he can command a job anywhere. There's talk that he could take over from Eddie Jones as England coach.
And by all accounts, from all the articles I've read on Scott Robertson, is that he's one of those people that just infuses enthusiasm and positivity around him, and there's no, you know, it's not a surprise that he's been so successful. And you look at the Crusaders. I mean, a lot of people wrote them off when Dan Carter, McCaw, and they lost it. Two of the best players ever to play the oval ball-shaped game. And then look what he does with the Crusaders, and look where they are. I mean, just that's a testament to him. And I think Ronan O'Gara talked about it in an article I read in the Irish Times about you know, how much it changed his perception on the game, spending time with Scott Robertson. So, yeah.
But if you also look at the balance that they have, last year they scored 90 tries. They lost 2 out of 19 games, and they conceded the fewest points. Yeah. Now, the Lions scored 89 tries. They lost 8 games and missed 421 tackles, which was the second most. And that was the difference between the two sides, and we saw that when they played each other in the crunch game at the end. It's just, we tend to struggle to find the balance. We either are brilliant defensively, we can't score a try, or as the Bulls did last year, scored a lot of tries but just leaked. You know, they would score 4 and leak 6. And it's to try and find that balance. And that's when I look at the South African side. You asked earlier, for me it will still be, come the end, it will be the Sharks and the Lions. I think that will offer the most. Robert de Pre has said it, he's put pressure on himself, and rightfully so. Yeah. He said no more excuses. If you can't believe you can win this tournament with the squad he's got, then you shouldn't be coaching. So,
well, that's good. I mean, it's nice for people to put their necks out there, and like you say, the culture in this country has been very much around Alistair Coetzee. You know, look what he did with the Stormers, which was basically nothing. With the Springboks, he was horrible. But it was all about a 4-year plan. Judge me after the World Cup. It's like the Checker syndrome, you know. Judge me after. It's like some of these coaches shouldn't have jobs. And when you look at a guy like Scotty Robertson and the impact that he's had on the Crusaders and every team he's ever been involved in, people underestimate again leadership from a coaching point of view and how much they can infuse and dribble down that infectious sort of belief. And without a doubt, when you look, that's my problem with the Bulls. On paper, this year they look like a solid unit. Where they're going to fall short is on touring this year. You know, that Afrikaans mentality of trying to bully people. It's not going to work overseas.
Well, it's granite at home and putty overseas. It tends to be a lot of those teams. If they don't know mom and dad are up in the stands, they tend to fall apart.
For me, the Bulls on paper are good, but not going to do well this year.
Well, let's just look at the games this weekend, and then I'll get the odds from you. But I've got the Bulls to win at home against
7-10. So the Bulls are 7-10 favourites against the Stormers 12-10. Point spread is -3.5. So the Bulls are favourite to win by 4 or more. That to me is just one of those bets that I look. The first week in any competition, any so-called expert out there saying, you know, I've got guaranteed winners, and week 1 is an absolute minefield for punters. There's how many changes, how many people out, how many people in, new coaching structures, first game of the season. It's just, the bookies know about as little as we know. And usually I start putting down bigger bets in week 3 and 4 when I see a bit of form and have studied each game. So for me, that game could go either way. The Bulls on paper look good. I think it's going to be raining at Loftus on Saturday from what I can see with the weather. You've also got Kitsoff injured. So originally when you look at that, when I looked at the game at the beginning of the week and looked at the tight 5 for the Stormers in that sort of game, I thought they could do it. I'm not so sure with this tight 5.
Yeah, I think the home ground advantage there. I think they took a lot out of the match that they played down here and held a lot back, the Bulls. Got the Sharks, I think, to win quite comfortably against the Samoas, who are improved under Jamie Joseph and Tony Brown. And then the Lions,
they couldn't improve from the point of view that they couldn't get any worse.
Yeah, they couldn't get any worse, but they're playing with a bit more structure. They've kind of beefed up their squad a bit with a few more imports. The Lions, I think, as I said, I think the Lions will still be one of the better South African sides, but the Jaguares have proven to be their nemesis. And in Buenos Aires, I've got the home team to win there.
Yeah, you can get. Let me have a look. Sorry, I think the.
It's 14 to 10. You said.
Yeah, for the Jaguars, 14 to 10. I like that bet as well. I like 14 to 10 for the Jaguars. So I'm going to put down 1,000 rand to win 1,400 back, 2,400 back that the Lions lose to the Jaguars. I just.
And lose by.
Just lose.
Just lose.
Yeah. By 1 point, hopefully. But I mean, 2, 3, 4, 100, doesn't matter.
And then finally, the big one in New Zealand is going to be Blues at home against the Crusaders. Martin on his comeback, Liam McDonald first started as the head coach, Tanu Umaga is now in the coaching team. Typically, the Blues remind me of the Stormers. Before every season, they're going to win the championship. There's a hoorah, and by the week 5, it's like just doom and gloom. Where do you see that one going? It's in Auckland at Eden Park.
Yeah, the Crusaders are favoured by about 7 points. You know, again, it's week 1, so no one has a clue. There's always upsets in the first few weeks, massive upsets.
You staying away from that one?
Yeah, of course. I'm going to stay away from it. I may look at the total points and advise people on total points before kickoffs. But the game that's interesting to me is not that one. I mean, the Crusaders on paper should win. I just don't know if they're going to win by 7 points. The game that interests me is the Chiefs versus the Highlanders. Now the Chiefs that started the week as favourites, and now they're the underdogs. So a lot of money is coming in for the Highlanders, and I'm not so sure why.
Yeah, again, in those New Zealand derbies, home ground advantage tends to play a big role. Yeah. If it was down in Dunedin, I'd fancy the Highlanders. In Hamilton,
yeah, but last year the Chiefs rolled them by 20 plus points when they played the Highlanders away.
You know, in Hamilton, though, I'm going to fancy the Chiefs for that one.
Yeah, I do too. I'm going to put another 1,000 rand down to win 2,000 back. That the Chiefs edge the Highlanders in that first game.
So that's also just an outright bet.
Just an outright bet.
Okay, so your two outright bets: Chiefs to win and Jaguares to beat the Lions.
Yeah, yeah. I may look at some in-run betting and stuff like that, but and I'm excited by it. I have to say, there's more hype around the Super Rugby this year than in the last 4 years.
I think also because of the World Cup year and so much to play for.
Yeah. So again, just for a recap. Oh, let's have a look at the outside. Let's look at. I was chatting to you about my outside bet for the Rugby Championship, the Super Rugby Championship. And the Highlanders at 9 to 1 offer great value to me. I know I've picked them to lose, and
we're talking for the tournament now.
For the tournament.
Yeah. And I think we spoke before we started that they have the least amount of All Blacks in their squad, so they're the least affected when it comes to this resting, ensuring certain game time per player. I still think a New Zealand side will win it this year, even though they do tend to perform poorer in World Cup years. There's still enough depth around that. And 9 to 1, that is a good call. But I don't think they'll be winning the tournament.
Well, that's why they're 9 to 1, you know. but a little tickle on 9 to 1 wouldn't go amiss. Wales versus England.
Wales definitely at home. Wales by a score, it'll be tight. Yeah. But it's the greatest Welsh side ever, according to Eddie. So he's already set it up. If they do lose, he's lost to the greatest team.
Well, what's going to be interesting is if Eddie wins. He's insufferable now. Just imagine if he beats Wales, how insufferable he's going to be.
Well, he will have just beaten the greatest Welsh team ever.
Ever, yeah.
He's beaten an Irish team that beat the All Blacks. So it's good. It's a great year in terms of...
Clearly Eddie's never had a pint of beer in a pub in Llanelli.
It's a great year because if you take the November internationals last year and how close they were, we got all this hype around Super Rugby. Let's not forget there's still top 14, the Premiership, the Champions Cup. It's so much good rugby that's got to be played before September. And then last man standing. How many players are still going to be standing by the time the World Cup comes along? So it's the most exciting year in in terms of rugby.
Yeah, look, I think that there's making any speculation on the World Cup is interesting just from a conversational point of view, but the landscape's going to be completely different at the end of the Six Nations. At the end of the Super Rugby, they're going to be, and this is where you say the RASI with his, and any good rugby structure and team is going to have 3 slots at each position, and we're going to be talking about a lot of players that we haven't been talking about today by the time we start looking at the Rugby World Cup.
Well, I look forward to the Bulls winning at Loftus, and sadly the Lions are losing in Buenos Aires.
Well, let's see. Thanks, Mark, for coming in.
Always a pleasure.
Cheers.